Hyperinflation today for June 4th, 2021. Hoarding's a word we use to shame people, to mock them, or to pity them. You've got that TV show Hoarders where you're just helping people out of this mental problem they have of accumulating. And that may have been good advice for a time, but you can now see different words start to show up, like stockpiling, which sounds much more sensible, and accumulating large inventory, which is another term that I'm going to show in a book that I'll recommend later in this video. This is my local hardware store in the background here. And it's covered in lumber. You can't see the hardware store because they've got so much lumber in the parking lot. And this is a parking lot where normally you'd allow customers to come in and park their vehicles so they could come in and purchase products. But in a hyperinflationary environment, letting customers come in to purchase products may not be the best way to survive as a business. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in that book I told you about. But first, let me show you the price history of lumber in this very hardware store that I've been going to for years. And I started taking pictures of the prices in February because they had already doubled at that point. And now look, they've doubled again. Almost doubled again in 4 months between February and June. A 2x4 is $10.59 where it was $6.79, and these prices are in Canadian dollars. These prices are in American dollars. This is a photo from the internet. $1,000, what $1,000 US dollars would buy you last fall, and what $1,000 would buy you today in lumber. So that's how much purchasing power the dollar has lost when compared to lumber. This is another shot of my local hardware store with the lumber in the foreground. So this strategy is actually out of one of the books I recommended earlier in an earlier video on this channel called 5 Book Recommendations for Hyperinflation or something like that. And this is from a chapter on inventory and how businesses in Latin America manage their inventory in a way to survive through hyperinflation. So I'll just read this whole thing. Change inventory policies if necessary to permit the accumulation of large inventories during times of hyperinflation. So that's hoarding. That's what I would call hoarding. In high inflationary economics, inventory becomes not only a source for production, but also a speculative device because its value frequently increases faster than the value of other investments. So it can make sense to just sit on your inventory and not really move it as much, not really like buy and sell, but just hold. Just hold like these people do with Bitcoin. You just hold it and watch its value explode. And then just sell little bits off to pay your bills, which is exactly what they're doing now. Depending on current prices, cash is often used to purchase large amounts of inventory, usually in the form of raw materials. A standard manufacturing tenet in the United States is that inventory should be kept as low as possible. This is called just-in-time inventory. And it's the way that businesses have been managing their supply chain for quite a while now, as long as I've been alive. Continuing on, but in a hyperinflationary economy, there are 2 strong incentives for stockpiling inventory. It can protect profit margins that might otherwise be eroded by sudden price increases from suppliers, or you can go on and say just volatility in general. It smooths out volatility. And it can protect the company from shortages. So say you're not able to obtain lumber for a number of months, you would have a stockpile of that, which often arise when wage and price controls are used to combat inflation. We haven't seen too much of this yet. We've seen a little bit, but this is something that can create shortages as well. So one of my favorite YouTubers here, Uneducated Economist, who has been teaching me about lumber now for 1.5 years, I've been watching his videos. He is noticing these stockpiles, and I think he might be affected by a little bit of normalcy bias. And he thinks, oh, well, these stockpiles of lumber, these are going to be available for customers, which is why we're going to see prices drop. But what he's seeing may not be available supply for customers to buy. I mean, they can buy it, but they will have to buy it at a very high price. But what he's seeing is actually a savings account of a sort. So he's seeing a capital asset that a company has purchased for a reason, not necessarily to sell, because a company during a hyperinflationary time can do better sitting on inventory than they can trying to get cash flow, which normally, in normal times, a business survives on cash flow. So you have inventory in, inventory out creates cash flow. Inventory in, inventory out creates cash flow. But when you've got hyperinflation on the horizon, or you're living in the middle of hyperinflation, you want as much inventory in as possible, and then you just bleed it out as the prices skyrocket. You just bleed out little bits of inventory just to keep a minimum amount of cash on the books to keep the business going during a time of crisis. So I'd like to submit this as a reason why we're seeing all these stockpiles, but we're just not seeing those lumber prices come down, and we may not see these lumber prices come down if these businesses are following the sort of advice that is in this book, Hyperinflation Survival Guide, Strategies for American Businesses, written in 1989. A very good book, by the way. I'll recommend it again. There's a link on my previous video to find this book for yourself. You can just Control F and search through the book. That's what I've done to find this passage. I just searched for stockpiling. And you can see what other advice is in this book, and maybe it will let you anticipate what's going to happen in the future. So thanks for watching. This has been Inflation Today for June 4th, 2021. Goodbye.